There are two versions of you, the one you describe and the one your behavior describes. One is a story you tell, the other is a record you keep. And when they disagree, the record is what's true. This is the ledger of your life decisions.
For 8 episodes, we looked at what you'd been missing, the gaps, the drift, the patterns you'd been explaining away. And you saw them. So let's not relitigate that. We're past that now. So here's where we're going to go next. There are two versions of you. There's the one you'd describe and the priorities you'd list, the values you'd name, and the person you'd say that you are. And then there's the one your behavior describes. And most of the time, you assume those two are the same person. And they're not. One of them is a story that you tell, and the other is a record that you keep. And when the story and the record disagree, the record is what's true. So this episode is about reading that record. Because somewhere in the last 8 episodes, you started thinking the gap was something happening to you. And it isn't. You've been writing it. So let me start with a principle you already use, just not here. When you want to understand something at work, you don't ask people what they intend. You look at what they do. Because intentions are cheap and anyone can have good ones. Conduct is expensive. It costs time, attention, effort. It's the things you can't fake your way through. So when you want the truth about a person, a team, a project, you read the behavior. You trust the record over the testimony. Now turn that same instrument on yourself. Every choice you make is an entry into a ledger, where you put your hours, where you put your attention, what you reach for first, what you keep putting off. You've been keeping this ledger your whole life. You've just never sat down to read it. And here's what makes the ledger so unforgiving. It doesn't record what you meant to do. It just records what you did. And you can believe sincerely and completely that your family is your highest priority. And that belief is real. I'm not going to question that. But the belief is a line in the story. And the ledger, it just doesn't track belief. It tracks deposits. And if you went back through the last month, not the month you intended to have, but the actual one, and you tallied those deposits, where did the hours go? Where was the best of your intention? What got the front of your mind and what got the leftovers? And you might find that the ledger tells a different story than the one you've been narrating. Not a worse person's story, just a more honest one. And so my first question, if someone reconstructed your priorities from your conduct alone, no access to anything you'd say about yourself, what would they conclude that you decided mattered? You know, time is truly the hardest currency to lie with, isn't it? You can't fake interest. You can't fake attention to it for a few minutes. You can tell yourself a generous story about your intentions, but you cannot be in two places. Every hour you spend is an hour you choose over every other way that you could have spent it. That's what makes time the cleanest evidence in the ledger. So let's look at it carefully, and let's look at the right part. Not the hours you're obligated to, the work you have to do, the things that aren't really a choice, and set those aside. Let's look at the margin. So discretionary hours, the space between the things you have to do, the recovery time, the decompression, I just need 20 minutes, the scroll, the things you do to unwind that somehow takes the whole evening. Because here's the thing about margin. Nothing forces it. No one's making you spend it the way you spend it, which means the margin is the purest signal of your preference you have. So when the obligations lift and the time is generally yours, where does it go? Whatever's there in that unguarded space is what you actually reach for when nothing's compelling you. And for a lot of capable men, the honest answer is uncomfortable. The margin just doesn't go to the people they'd say they'd die for. It goes to the path of least resistance, the screen, the work that follows you home because it's familiar and rewarding and asks nothing emotional of you, the hobby, the quiet. And I'm not saying that you don't deserve rest or any of these. I'm just saying that rest is evidence too. Where your free attention lands and where nothing requires it to land anywhere is the most honest thing about what you've decided that you want. And so here's my next question. Where does your free attention go when nothing in the world requires it? And what does that location tell you that you might not want to know? And so here's a different kind of entry into the ledger. It's not time, but quality. See, you're not the same person to everyone. You have a best version, the patient one, the curious one, the one who listens carefully and thinks carefully and brings a sharp end to your attention. And you have a depleted version, the half present, the running on fumes, nodding while your mind is actually somewhere else. You're not a hypocrite for doing those, because everyone does. The question isn't about distribution. Who gets the best version of you? For a lot of high-capacity men, the answer follows a strange pattern. The best version goes to people who've earned the least claim on it. You bring your finest attention to client who replaced you tomorrow if those numbers didn't change. You'd bring your sharpest patience to a colleague, a customer, a stranger in a meeting. You're charming, you're engaging, you're fully there for people whose presence in your life is entirely conditional. And then there's the prime version of you that just runs out. And the people who get what's left, well, those are the people who'd stay through your worst, who aren't going anywhere and who don't need to be impressed. Unfortunately, they get the depleted one, the leftovers. And here's the quiet logic underneath it if you trace it honestly. You'd bring the best to the people who might leave and your remainder to the people who won't. Which means, without actually saying it, you've decided that people who will stay can absorb a lesser version of you. That their loyalty is kind of permission. And that's because they're safe. They can have what's safe to give, which is whatever's going to be left over. And that's not a feeling. That's a decision. And you've been making this one daily. And so question, who consistently gets the most depleted version of you? And when did you decide where the ones who could absorb it? And so here's something true about you, that you're a person who improves things. That when something matters to you, you don't leave it to luck. You study it. You iterate, you raise the standard, and you chase it because you refuse to accept good enough in any domain that you decided that's worth your effort. And that's real capacity. And it's partly why you've done well. So now look at the inverse. Look at what you've left to chance. Look at what you've put on autopilot, what runs on default, on momentum, on it's probably fine. Because things that you optimize, the things you leave to chance are not random. They're a map of what you've decided deserves your effort. You'll research a decision at work for hours. You'll get a second opinion and run the scenarios and pressure test it. And then the most important relationships in your life, you run those on instinct, on habit, on whatever the day happens to produce. No strategy, no standard, no iteration. You just hope that they hold. And if anyone asks, you'd say those relationships matter more than the work decision. But the effort tells a different story. Effort is a vote. You vote your effort toward what you've generally decided matters, and you withhold it from what you've decided will sort itself out. The places you've stopped trying to improve or the places you've quietly concluded don't warrant the trying. That conclusion might horrify you if you said that out loud, wouldn't it? But you didn't say it out loud. You voted it on unspent hour of effort at a time. And so question, where have you left your life on autopilot? And what does leaving it there reveal about what you've concluded it's worth? It's got one more entry. And this one's going to be about speed. Watch how fast you say yes to things. Some requests get an instant yes. You clear them immediately. There's no friction, no negotiation. They just jump in the queue. Other things live permanently in later. And the reason the speed is itself is a signal. You clear instantly what you've decided is a non-negotiable. What you defer indefinitely is what you've decided can wait, which, past a certain point, becomes what you've decided doesn't have to happen at all. And because the thing about later that you've been refusing to look at is a later that never arrives isn't a delay, it's a decision wearing a delay's clothing. Because you've told yourself that you're going to get to it. That conversation, the presence, the thing that you keep meaning to do and meaning to be different about. And the deferral has gone on so long that the deferral becomes the answer. You didn't decide not to do it. That would feel like a choice, and a choice would feel like a responsibility. So instead, you kept it in later, where it feels like an intention you simply haven't reached yet. But intentions have an expiration date. Past it, an unacted intention isn't a plan. It's just a comfortable way of saying no without having to feel like you did. So question, what have you been deferring so long that the deferral has quietly become your answer? So let's try to put this ledger back together. The hours, the free attention, the best version of you and where it goes, the effort you spend and the effort you withhold, that instant yes and that permanent later. Each one of those is an entry, and the entries add up to a record. And the record describes a person who has made a long series of decisions about what gets him. And now here's the turn, the reason this is the start of something new, not just more of what you have already seen. In the last 8 episodes, you talked about the gap, like it was weather, something that happened, something that you were caught in, a season you were enduring, a current that pulled you, a drift that took you somewhere you didn't mean to go. And that language just left you off a particular hook, because weather isn't your fault. You can't author the weather. You can only survive it. But the ledger doesn't show weather. It shows authorship. And every entry is a choice. Small, often unconscious, and rarely dramatic. But it's still a choice. A hand picked up the phone instead of looking up. A best self handed to a stranger. An hour spent on the path of least resistance. A later that you let calcify to a no. No single one of those is a betrayal. But the record they add up to isn't an accident. You didn't drift there. You wrote your way there. One entry at a time and in your own hand. And you can't unknow that now. And so if your life is something you've been authoring, rather something that you've been enduring, what have you been writing? Your behavior is the most honest thing about you. It doesn't care what you intended. It doesn't care about the story that you tell or the values you list or the version of yourself you sincerely believe in. It just records what you did. And if you want to know what you've actually decided matters, and if you want to know that you've actually decided matters, stop consulting your intentions and read your conduct. The ledger's been open this whole time. You just hadn't looked at it. Now you've looked. And here's the part you can't walk back. You can no longer call this drift. You can no longer say it's happening to you because you've seen the record. And the record, it's in your handwriting. This is what Act 2 is all about. Act 1 was about seeing this gap. And Act 2 is about the moment that you realize the gap has an author and you've just been introduced to him. And he's not a villain and he's not careless. He's a capable man of making 1,000 small choices, most of them on autopilot, and all of them adding up to a life that doesn't match the story he tells about it. That's the friction. Not that you don't see it, that you see it, and the hand that's writing is yours. So just sit with that, because we're not going to resolve it for you. Well, at least not yet. The Band of Brothers is where men stop reading the record alone and starts changing what gets written. And if you're ready for that, you know what to do.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man Podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.